Hello, and obviously welcome to today's live webinar. I am your host, Nathan Sharp, and for anyone that doesn't know, I work for CM Life Science, and I'm a global headhunter and recruiter here at CM Life Science, and I specialize in the point of care diagnostics market on a global scale. Today's webinar is, of course, all about what's next for lateral flow. And before I get started with introducing the three men in front of me, I just wanted to go through some of the little admin questions and admin things that we need to cover. So we will be running a Q&A at the end of the session. So if you would like to pick the brains of any three of my guests, then put your question in the chat and we will do our best to answer as many as possible. Gentlemen, if you're all ready, then let's get started. And Rob, I'll pass it over to you if you'd like to quickly introduce yourself and who you are and what you work and who you work for.
Sure. My name is Rob Miller. I work at Drummond Scientific. We're a vertically integrated manufacturer just outside of Philadelphia. We concentrate on IVF, in vitro diagnostic, and lab instruments in the life sciences space. And we're, pretty excited to be part of the LFA community more recently than some of the other members of the panel.
Great, thank you. Angus, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Nathan. My name is Angus, and I work for Katalyst Laboratories. We're an authorized distributor of molecular diagnostic test platforms. We also provide lateral flow tests to our clients. We work with a large number of corporate and travel clients across the UK and overseas. We run testing at various different travel hubs, do a great deal of testing in corporates and film and TV space, etc. And have our own laboratories where we process tests as well. So we have a wealth of experience running all sorts of different testing solutions pretty much since the pandemic began. And delighted to be here today.
Thank you very much, Angus. And last but not least, Leigh, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, my name is Leigh Thomas. I work with Abingdon Health. We're a contract development and manufacturer with high throughput automated manufacturing, based out of two sites in York and Doncaster in the UK, and really providing that manufacturing service to a global customer base, both with COVID-19 response as well as non-COVID testing. So yeah, we've been around a while and well and truly entrenched in the lateral flow space.
Great, thank you all for that, and yeah, great to have you all here as well. And thank you for obviously taking the time to be a part of the panel. I'll kick off with the first question then, and that is, why has it taken a global pandemic for lateral flow to be properly appreciated? Angus, I will start with you. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are on that. It's an interesting question you asked there, Nathan. And one answer to that would be that it certainly was appreciated. I think before, maybe not properly appreciated, but it's been used in many other areas of medicine, areas like pregnancy tests. And to give one example, it was used. It's been used very effectively to diagnose malaria. In fact, the numbers of tests that were sold, of lateral flow tests that have been sold in that space, are very large. I mean, even back in 2017, I believe there were about 276 million rapid tests for malaria was supplied globally in parts of the world that basically are quite challenging. So I think that it's certainly been a technology that's been out there. It perhaps hasn't come to the major to the notice of the public particularly before, because unless you happen to have a particular need to use a lateral flow test for some area, then you perhaps wouldn't have come across them. But I think one of the key things about lateral flow devices is that is that whilst they can be controversial, they do provide a cheap and effective way of getting diagnostic services out into the front line and in front of people where perhaps it's difficult to do more complicated types of testing. I think one of the things that we've seen very much is that there's a growing interest, and certainly as we move beyond the pandemic, in diagnostic testing. I think it's becoming a key focus. We've had feedback from various different healthcare areas, including governments, on this, that as we move forward, the amount of sort of a point of care diagnostic testing, which is going to be used, particularly to predict things as well, I think is going to be very interesting. And I think there's very much the way that the marketplace is going to move. So I predict that lateral flow tests are actually going to become even more dominant and used in more and more areas as we move forward. Great,
thank you for that. Rob, do you agree with that, and what are your views?
Yeah, so I think Angus brings up some really great points. I think that certainly it's lateral flow has been in most consumers' lives, just in a different format and being probably less critical than historically than in the immediate past. So I think that, taking a different shape and being such an important part of transitioning from the oh no to some sort of relief, and maybe being able to use that as a gate to entry into school or come back to work. I think that the importance has certainly become much more present in everyone's lives.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And Leigh, what are your views on that?
I think it touches really a little bit on what Angus was saying. It really depends on which side of the optics you're looking at that question, and the point of view. I mean, I guess you could add in the UK, perhaps in other markets, because some global markets or verticals have been reliant on lateral flow and using lateral flow to great effect for a number of years. Examples in some of the infectious disease testing that Angus brings up, but also drugs of abuse testing, roadside testing. With law enforcement, workplace testing in the US for drugs abuse testing, with the drug cup, and also infectious disease testing, as we said. But it's essentially a quick and cost-effective aid to diagnosis when it's required to be deployed in the field, and that's really where it's been. It's only now really where you've had less of an impact of that, and where now it's actually the original question, where the pandemic is actually threatening and become a huge threat, I think, to the economies and opening up and putting public, that's what's brought it to the forefront. And like anything, when something gets threatened, you reach for what is going to be and get you up and out of the problem as soon as possible. And that's why really now it's new to some of the markets, but for many markets it's been a staple tool in a combat. And really of the respective disease state. And it's because it's affordable, it's rapid, and it's easy to use. And then it becomes very compelling.
No, definitely. I think I think a couple of you mentioned as well about it. Obviously, the quickness of the test and it being cost effective. Do you think that because it is quick and cost effective, this is the way maybe it's got its reputation as well? Because people maybe see it as, because they're kind of doing it themselves and self-administrating the test, maybe people see it as almost like a simplistic test, so therefore not as accurate.
I think the two are probably not. It is a simple test, and it's a simple test to operate. It's certainly not a simple test to develop and put together.
Yeah, I'll take your word for that. I'm not
sure. I can certainly vouch for that. Definitely,
certainly, and segue it into perhaps the other question about inaccurate reputation. I mean, that's something that we could probably do with an industry, making sure there's enough education out there on that basis.
Yeah.
Because I think we're going to come on to discuss that now a little bit, aren't we?
I was just about to move on to that as well and say, how can we overcome that inaccurate reputation that I guess lateral flow tests have become known for? I'm unsure which one of you'd like to start, but maybe Leigh, if you'd like to start.
Carry on.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, I mean, I think let's not perpetuate the myth with a question either. I mean, the reputation for inaccuracy is probably only in certain areas and with certain, and then, in terms of the uninitiated. Mm-hmm. there's certainly a generalization that's been placed across lateral flow tests. But like any diagnostic or any other product, you've got better performing tests and you've got than others.
Yeah.
So to say the technology is inaccurate in itself is probably, and the platform is probably not correct. Look, regulatory bodies and testing, and we're a heavily regulated industry, is the key and should be welcomed. I mean, that drives out this inaccurate reputation. And also, when you see the exceptional performance of tests in the market, and also I think in terms of responsible reporting, we've seen rapid tests and lab testing being a little bit of a football, being bounced between, almost like Apple and IBM. I mean, they're trying to play different technologies off in this pandemic, and that's that's nonsense. I mean, in effect, all diagnostic tests have a role to play and a place in a testing regime or regimen and design testing program. So I think just to answer your question, responsible reporting certainly and an education of the masses, but that's been now kind of getting more accepted. Yeah. And a focus on high quality materials. I mean, it is important to note, beware cheap imitations. These are complex devices and they rely on biologicals and complex materials. And it's important that, you can't compromise on quality and shortcuts. And that's really got to be understood in the market as well. Because even though they look simple, they're not. And I mean, that's why that's why it's important that the quality is maintained.
No, definitely.
Yeah, I would.
Sorry, Angus. No, go ahead.
No, so I was going to say I would certainly agree with that, Leigh. I think you've hit on some really, really good points there. Certainly our view is that proper regulation of the tests is really important because there are some really good, effective lateral flow tests out there, as Leigh says. There are also, frankly, some tests that are not so good. And in fact, there are some tests that are not so good that have been adopted on quite a major scale. And I think this has not helped the situation because then, obviously people then you see headlines reporting that tests are used in certain settings and aren't giving accurate results, and it's often because they're very poorly manufactured. I mean, we are test agnostic as a company. We see ourselves as working best in class. So we actually have a team of scientists who evaluate new products constantly. So we've looked, far and wide basically for, what we see to be best in class tests. And there's a lot of tests which are being sold on the marketplace, which frankly are quite dubious provenance. And I think, what we've seen as well is, it's interesting, but regulation is really key here because if you want to operate as a testing company, you have to have a UCAS accreditation, which is not an easy thing to get. And any company who acquires a UCAS, it really is a very credible organization. However, if you want to sell lateral flow tests, you can do that without any form of regulation at all. And I think that is a problem for the industry because it's allowing, frankly, people that, we've had people offer us tests, frankly, that we've been quite gobsmacked as to who they are, where they've come from, just literally almost like Del Boy in the back of a lorry type environment. And I think that doesn't help. So I think if there was to be more regulation in place to say that if you are going to offer and sell tests, you have to be properly accredited. Maybe that is UCAS, maybe it's something else. But I definitely think that you need to be able to give people confidence that they're working with and dealing with credible companies who know what they're doing, such as the people that are here today.
Yeah. And just to kind of, before Rob jumps in, if I can just add to that, he's also looking at the environment where lateral flow tests are deployed. It's not just in pandemic arrangements and arenas. These rapid tests are used in incredibly critical situations. In environmental situations, food testing, the burger you eat is likely to have been tested at some point with a diagnostic test to test for its toxin content. So also the plane that you arrived on this morning is likely to have been tested with a lateral flow test to test whether it's got bacterial in the fuel tanks. So, these tests are being used. It's just always, unless you get into a pandemic, you're not fully aware of the criticality of the environments and actually the good quality of tests being used in those areas.
Mm-hmm.
No, definitely.
Sorry, Rob.
No problem.
Go ahead, Rob.
I think that some of the inaccuracy reputation is more of a relativity component because if you're going to compare the sensitivity to a gold standard lab test that you're benchmarking LFA against that, you might be able to make the argument that it's inaccurate. But I think that the use case is different in many cases, and the chemistry has improved significantly over the years, and I think that with novel diseases, maybe you have some struggles in the early going, especially when you have really low sample sizes and some constraints on the supply chain. But I think that the other component for us that we've seen a lot of our customers focus on is the usability and the user experience, and trying to create the easiest path to the right answer and eliminate as many possible errors as you're able to. And I think that you're going to see a lot of not to jump ahead, but a lot of newer devices in the LFA world move in that direction. And I think that there's also several new customers that we've had over the last 4 years that have played in this semi-quantitative world, where you get a little bit of the best of both worlds, where you have the binary answer at the patient's fingertips, with a little bit of color to it, so that you can help manage and monitor too. It's not just a yes or no decision with some of the infectious disease or disease states.
No, definitely. Thank you all three for that as well. I guess that puts us in a position as well to say, what role do and have lateral flow tests played alongside other point of care testing, either platforms or devices as a whole? And what role will they play in the future as well? Angus, if you would, I know you both have the lateral flow and the platform as well. So if you would like to kick us off with that one.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we're firm advocates that having testing solutions is the critical component in these environments. I think, has been said before by both my co-panelists. There's a time and a place for all testing and different types of testing, and it's very important to sort of like to understand when's the right time to use different types of testing. I mean, in our experience, our core test is a rapid PCR test. Which can be run in an hour essentially. So we have a lot of clients who like to have the lateral, who use PCR testing because they can get those on-site results quickly. They also have a strategy of using lateral flow with that. Some of our clients in the cruise world, for example, we work a lot in that space. They have a strategy of having people have a PCR test before arriving, and then when they get embarked, they use lateral flow test to get them on board the ship. So I think definitely the key to this is to basically understand, what the level of risk is, what the type of testing that is required to give people confidence. I mean, there are certain environments where, frankly, you need a PCR test because you have to give people that key certainty that they are in an environment where people are negative, and there are other environments where it's more important to use a screening device to sort of test people, but you don't need that greater accuracy of PCR. So it's a question of judging the circumstances in the situation and being able to offer a full solution. I think it's interesting to note as well that we've been involved in this space for some time, and we've come across many different new technologies. We actually had a lot of experience in launching a lamp test into the UK market last year that initially picked up a great deal of interest and was used in quite a variety of places. However, one of the challenges we found is that any form of new technology that you deal with also has to be fully adopted by governments universally. In fact, the reason we moved on to a rapid PCR test as well as lateral flow was because we saw that LAMP just didn't get that full acceptance. When you look at travel, it's a PCR test which is necessary. There are some countries that accept LAMP, but a lot of them don't. And so I think that when we talk about new technologies, I happen to think that lateral flow testing, there's a lot of interesting things happening in that space, as Rob alluded to. And I think that we'll see some really interesting things. But I think that in reality, it's things like PCR testing, lateral flow testing will remain really key. I mean, we hear about breath tests and sweat tests and all sorts of interesting things, but there's a long way to go from people having those and bringing them to market and then being universally accepted for use across the world in different settings. And so I think that a combination of those types of testing is going to play a key part as we move forward. And it's just a question of using the right test in the right environment.
Yeah, Absolutely. Rob, I saw you nodding your head in agreement with Angus there. Is that something that you agree with as well, or what are your views?
Yeah, I think that the right test for the right place and time, and certainly as Angus mentioned, urgency is one of the areas where LFA has an opportunity to shine, and I think screening is another important area. But when you absolutely need the precision of PCR, there's going to be a place for that, and I think that our regulatory bodies are different, but probably move at the same pace. So we've had some interesting innovations that haven't made it to market because of a combination of customer adoption and the willingness of the government to take that next step to put more responsibility on the patient or downstream in the value chain. I think that is where it's heading, and one of the very interesting side effects of the pandemic is it has absolutely accelerated that shift. You saw an overnight willingness to adopt telemedicine as soon as folks were unable to get to the doctor, and you've seen a also in the States at least a shift to the FDA's willingness to allow some new infectious disease in-home testing. And we've had customers that we've been working with that have really cool products that are moving in that direction, right? Trying to get as much in the patient's hand as possible, and whether that's a at-home collection and fill something out online, or that ends up being a full test, maybe guided by a app or something on one of our the customer's platforms, so that you can take care of the reporting requirement for some of those infectious diseases. I think that is where we're moving, and as I mentioned, the user experience and usability components before, those are kind of critical and getting there the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. Leigh, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at what's ahead for the kind of lateral flow, then I think with the glass ceiling is pretty much being well and truly broken on this, the values being seen daily. I think if you just look specifically on if we look over the next 12 months, then I think that the COVID, the pandemic is still going to be within different parts of the pandemic curve in different territories. And then that's where it comes back to specific testing regimes required for different environments and where we've got acute testing in place, then of course PCR antigen testing will still be progressing. We're coming out of the pandemic and perhaps post-vaccine, then we see now increasingly neutralizing antibody testing coming to the fore, and a need really to support those vaccine passports, and also the seroconversion of post-infection. So certainly we think that that's going to be coming forward. In terms of the wider scope, and I think Rob's quite right, actually. I mean, a lot of advocates in the industry have been saying for a long time, health budgets are staying static. Appointments are increasing, aging populations are increasing. There's so much pressure on healthcare that there's been a need really to try and move triage and primary care out of the doctor's office and into the hands of the patients. And there's been some resistance there, I think. What this pandemic has done is completely short-circuited that, and just really fast-forwarded and accelerated and shown what the threat of a ruptured healthcare system, which would have been over a period of time, is happening basically within 12 months. And that's what's driven then this behavioral change towards, well, actually, perhaps home testing is an environment. And certainly with the advent of app and looking at the use of data and driving data to the clinicians and the caregivers, that frees up our primary caregivers to be deployed against the acute requirements. Whereas chronic treatment, looking at infections, so for early intervention and prevention. I think one of the guys mentioned earlier on, prevention is key to future healthcare budgets and saving the billions that we need to do. I mean, you prevent, and instead of managing the symptoms of a chronic condition, which then effectively you prevented it through the proper appropriate management. I think that's the direction we'll be going in. And rapid testing and lateral flow has a very significant part to play in that, I think, because as we said, it's simple, people can use it, and the practice that the people have gained over this pandemic has really brought it into the common vernacular.
Yeah.
I've never heard PCR testing being referred to in the high street as I've had, or lateral flow testing, whereas, it's now really a commonplace. I think people are going to want it, actually. They don't have the time to go and spend six appointments and go back into there. They're going to want to be able to deal with that specifically at the time.
Absolutely.
That's it really.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I totally agree as well. I think even just speaking on behalf of some of my colleagues who don't work in this space here at Charlton Morris as well, I think they've all seen the speed and the test like lateral flow that we have to do on a weekly basis now, and it's opened their eyes to this market as well. And they're asking me questions about lateral flow and PCR that they previously wouldn't have done because of the last 12 months and the pandemic. Sorry, Angus, were you just about to?
No, I was simply going to say to what Leigh was saying there. I mean, I completely agree with that. We've seen, we've seen and had conversations, with people who are talking about the fact that, when you look at the NHS, for example, take one organisation, a lot of testing and diagnostic activities are looking to be outsourced as they move forward, particularly post-pandemic, and that where they can look at doing simple home tests for certain things and conditions that will help lift some of the burden that is obviously on the NHS that they're dealing with, because obviously they've borne the brunt of this pandemic. And I think, as Leigh was saying, I mean, one of the outcomes of this will be that I think we'll perhaps see a different way as to how they operate, because they're going to have to streamline certain things. So this area of rapid diagnostics in a sort of point of care setting is, I think, going to become a major play moving forward for sure.
Absolutely. Rob, any additional comments to that, or?
No, I think that the co-panelists have covered a lot of it. I will say that we've seen.
128, Jeffy, 128, please.
Excuse me.
It's okay.
I will say that we've seen progress in certain areas that I think is going to allow LFA to contribute to a greater degree, and it won't obviate PCR or laboratory testing, but I think that it'll be much more complementary and not just a afterthought or a supplemental thought. And simplicity and reduction of the number of pieces and integration and the number of steps is where we've seen that our customer base has focused on trying to make point of care testing easier to get the results into the hands of the patients.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think at this point it'd be good to I guess ask you all individually about kind of what you and your companies are doing within this space, and I guess what you guys are working on over the next 12 months as well, and allow you guys to speak to that if you wish. Leigh, if you would like to kick us off.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, first instance, I mean, it was an interesting point Angus brought up around, use of LAMP and bringing that PCR testing into the bedside and sort of into the point. I mean, we do a nucleic acid lateral flow test actually that works with isothermal amplification techniques. And we work with a number of groups on that at this point in time. We're looking to productize that. And that's I think that's an interesting development that'll come through over there. And that product's ready, kind of ready. In terms of us as a manufacturer, then we're very much geared up. So we've seen, as I said, we saw that ceiling breaking. We've developed with some consortium partners in the UK a neutralizing antibody test, and we're in the process that's being registered across the globe in anticipation of the and being commercialized in anticipation of the post kind of acute phase exit from pandemic. And the increasing need for neutralizing antibody testing. We're also building significant automated operations across our sites in Doncaster and York to rise and meet the challenge really of this increasing demand for lateral flow testing that we anticipate and that we see. And that's in support of some key and critical contracted partners that we support. but also building out for new opportunities as well in non-COVID world as well, which will also benefit, if you like, from the halo effect of having of lateral flow testing. So we're a contract development manufacturer. We are building capacity to meet the demand in short, and looking at the new technologies such as app work and the PCRD, as I say.
Great, thank you, Leigh. Rob, for yourself and Drummond.
Yeah, so we are finishing up an additional about 8,000 square feet on our second site to add to the LFA manufacturing capabilities that Drummond already has. And we're really excited about working in the startup world and the new product world as well. So I think that moving from kind of a COVID-centric LFA world right now is where we are to finding an opportunity to be the platform, right? We want to be able to have as many conditions tested for that make sense, at least on the platform as possible, and work in the contract manufacturing space. So finding the right customer mix and building up capacity to be able to both manage the ongoing COVID situation and also work on what's next. And again, I think that there's going to be some new novel devices that hit the market in the next 6 to 12 months. And the way that it's described around here is imagine something as easy as a pregnancy test, right? That has the diluent and the reading, and it's just, maybe not a smiley face or anything, but you end up with just a very clear positive and negative and a very contained solution.
Great. Thank you very much. And Angus, yourself.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. Well, unlike my two fellow co-panelists, we aren't a manufacturer of tests. We're a testing company, so we offer test solutions to our clients. So we're basically very interested in talking to and engaging with companies who have got these interesting new solutions. I mean, I think as both Leigh and Rob said, it's clearly there are some interesting things coming onto the horizon, and we're keeping a close eye on that. And we obviously are keen to talk to and work with companies who can do that. We think there'll still be a role for PCR and lateral flow testing moving forward, certainly in the short term. We obviously will continue to offer what we do there, but obviously we're keeping our eyes open for anything new and developing that's coming onto the marketplace that may be interesting. One of the things we have obviously is a large number of clients, so we're able to get feedback from some of these clients, some of whom are in quite interesting places. So it's quite interesting to hear what they need and what they're looking for, and keep our eyes on that, and to make sure that we can obviously be offering cutting edge solutions and adapt those as the market changes and more things are available. I think also post pandemic, we've very much got an eye on that. I think as we were talking about in the previous question, where the future of kind of using testing for areas well beyond COVID, not just here in the UK, but in other markets as well. So we've got a very firm eye on that marketplace as well. So we're developing things forward in that direction.
Great, thank you very much. I think we'll leave it there for our questions. However, I want to quickly go to some of the questions that have been asked by people watching. So I'm going to start with one from Thierry, and he said, more and more companies are manufacturing point-of-care lateral flow tests, and mostly in Korea, India, and China. From your view, which are the top 10 companies to follow in this industry? And if we consider it on an international market as well, I guess naturally you're all going to say yourselves. But aside from that, which is there any companies that stand out to any of you guys? And you don't have to give a top 10, but some insight would be great.
I think that we've seen in the States, at least, Abbott had a really strong response, and I think that their ability to have a lot of their manufacturing under their own roof was super helpful. Internationally, I think there's plenty of fantastic companies in Korea, India, and China. And I think that, making a top 10 would be a difficult, would want to give that a little bit more thought.
Yeah, no, of course. Leigh or Angus, is there any companies that you've seen within our market that stand out to you for either point of care devices or lateral flow, I guess?
I think Rob's right. I mean, there's a lot of different companies which have different strengths and weaknesses in terms of whether they're from their own product or like with contract manufacturing capacity like ourselves.
Yeah.
I think though that not all markets are the same. The Chinese market is quite different, and it is got its own ecosystem, and also, but obviously with the Korean market it's highly regulated as well with the KFDA. So I mean, they're quite reasonable. So
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think Rob's right. I think it's something you'd have to do a bit more research into, but that would be my response.
Great, thank you very much. Sorry, go on, Angus.
Yeah, I think so. I think I would sort of basically echo what Rob and Leigh said there. I mean, it's obviously quite difficult to select individual companies. However, I would say, I think I touched upon this point before, that I think more, I say regulation maybe is not the right word, but I think, a way of really understanding the products that are coming out, because there are some excellent companies, as has been said, in sort of China and the Far East. There are also some quite shocking companies as well that are selling their wares over here. And at the moment, they're all jumbled up into the same place. And I mean, if you've seen the number of clinical trials that I've seen, I'm sure my fellow panelists will say the same thing, that are all claim that their tests are the most accurate thing on the marketplace. And so, I think it is important to have a university recognized way of being able to cut through that and be able to say, yeah, these tests really are credible and these tests aren't credible. I mean, we for ourselves, we use a credible clinical trial basically as the critical factor for us. It has to be a well-renowned institution, whether that be a laboratory, whether that be a university, a hospital, wherever it might be, that has issued the clinical trial, and it has to be completely independent. But I think it would be helpful to the marketplace if there was more of that, so people could very quickly decide who is a serious test and who isn't.
Definitely. I guess touching on that accuracy and how we see things progressing, I wanted to move on to a question from Thomas, and he said, where do you see LFA readers being adopted? Will everyone have one in their homes within the next 2 to 5 years? What are your views on that?
Well, I would probably, if I could just jump in, I'd probably say that actually at this point in time, everyone does have an LFDA reader in their home. It's called a smartphone. And the hardware is already in place. You just need to train it to read your test and send the data.
Yep.
That's the short answer, and that's not being flippant. That's the reality of where we currently are. The lab test, that's a different market as well to lab test readers. The lateral flow reader market is worth about probably $1 billion, I think, worldwide pre-COVID, and there'll be an element of disruption there with smartphone diagnostics, but the smartphone is not just another cheap reader or another reader system. It's specific. It's there to do a job of data transfer, and lab readers have their job to do as well. So to answer the question, there may well be a requirement for readers depending on what you want to get out of your actual testing system and result, and that hardware is already in your home. It's just whether it's taken advantage of.
Definitely. Angus or Rob, any your views on that?
Yeah, we have multiple customers that have smartphones as a reader and transmitter for their LFA testing. I can imagine even more sensitive testing using a smartphone as a reader, particularly in environments with less reliable infrastructure and less reliable power grid. I can see that being a very attractive and growing market in the near future in the wake of COVID.
Great.
Yeah, I would completely agree with those statements there. I think smartphone is definitely the way forward there. And I think, one thing certainly from our experience with clients and customers is that the simpler you can keep a process, the better. So Putting something new into people's homes when there's already existing technology that can be repurposed to do that is obviously the way forward, I would say,
Absolutely. Well, I think that's probably a great place to leave it for today. Rob, Angus, Leigh, thank you all for joining us. I appreciate all of your time, your insight, and as well for anybody that did ask a question, please feel free to reach out to either myself or one of the guests. I'm sure we'll be happy to answer any questions that didn't get answered afterwards. Quick one as well for anybody that has watched this and wants to recap. The whole webinar will be put into a podcast form. So if you want to recap anything or go over what any of the panelists said, then it will be in a podcast form, and we will be kind of distributing that to via CM Life Science and obviously via the other 3 companies as well. So keep out for that. Keep an eye out for that. And I think that's about it, really. Like I said, thank you for your time, gentlemen. Thank you for everybody that's tuned in and watched. I think it's a great place to leave it.
Thanks to you as well, Nathan, for organising the event, and to my fellow panelists. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Angus.
Okay, thanks, guys. Okay.
Bye, Rob. Bye,
Cheers, thanks. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.